All right, thanks, Jacob. So, starting this afternoon off, so I'm Scott Shermer. I'm with the Illinois Department of Agriculture. I'm the state plant regulatory official here in Illinois. And we're going to do a little bit of exploring as far as states that don't have spotted lanternfly and some tools and approaches and hopefully some information that can help you better prepare, get ready, address some concerns that we've maybe already addressed, and you can take those home and run with them yourselves. But we're going to start off with Matt Howell at Clemson University. Matt is the invasive species program manager there in South Carolina. So Matt, are you on? Ready?
Uh, I'm here. Let me
Perfect.
go ahead and share my screen.
Cool.
All right, y'all see that?
Yes, sir.
All right, thanks. Let me go ahead and make that. Well, let's see. Let me turn it into a slideshow. There you go. And I only have one slide, so it won't be a lot. As I introduced, I'm Matt Howe, and I work with Clemson University, but I'm not with Extension, and I'm not a researcher, but I work with the state plant pest regulatory official. I'm the state survey coordinator. So in South Carolina, that's where we house our plant regulatory. So with that, I just want to let y'all know, I already said South Carolina is one of those states we're talking about that doesn't have spotted lanternfly yet. So I don't have a ton to report, but what I'm going to talk about is our online reporting tool that that we use for the public to kind of report where they find suspected spotted lanternfly. With that, let me open the link to that tool. This is our webpage, our clemson.edu/invasives. On that, you'll see we've got 3 reporting tools actually, and spotted lanternfly is just one of them. So I've got some experience handling reports from the public with some of the other pests that we're looking for. But let me open up our spotted lanternfly form. So I was going to kind of go through each of the questions in our form and just kind of tell you about why we chose to set up the questions that way. I like this first question because it's set up as a, kind of a photo question instead of just asking, yes, have you seen spotted lanternfly? We've got several photos of the different life stages. And we also have a button there for none of these. And I think that's pretty useful. Sometimes the public wants to report something and maybe they click none of these because what they actually saw was a longhorn beetle or a butterfly or something like that. And that kind of tells us if we get a large number of reports, it helps us kind of separate the wheat from the chaff. And we know that we don't really have to follow up if they chose none of the above. Next thing on the form is a date. It'll, auto-populate the date for you. And then the location. Location, I'm not sure why I chose the topographic map that you're seeing, but you can choose different base maps. And probably what I should have used, and one of the improvements that maybe we'll make to this form, is changing that to OpenStreetMaps. That's one that I like to use. It's that's a pretty good street map, kind of like a Google map or something like that. So one of the things that's nice, it helps you capture the exact location of where the report is coming from. People can click right here. And if you're on a mobile device, especially, it looks a little bit different if you're on a mobile device. But if you're on a mobile device, it has GPS enabled. It'll allow that. And you can also do it from your computer if I were to go through and allow this, but let's not do that right now. There's a search bar as well. So if somebody is doing this from their home computer, from their PC, or from their mobile device, and they don't have the GPS enabled, you can start type in an address, like we're on Westinghouse Road, that's where my office is. And something will probably come up. So you didn't even have to type an entire address, but it'll help you find your location. And then folks can use the map to navigate to where they actually are, and you can click and it'll put a point there and the exact location. You can also enter Latin long coordinates, or if you choose a spot on the map, it populates the Latin long for you. Next, we have a place where folks can enter or upload a photograph. So if you're on a PC, you can click here and search for a photograph that maybe you've saved. But what's even more useful is using it on a mobile device. You just click the button and use your camera to take a picture. Next question is something that I may be rethinking, but I like the way we set it up because we're asking the public how they prefer to be reached out to, whether that be call, text, or email. So, you know, if folks don't have an email address, maybe it's somebody that doesn't use email a lot, or they're aware to give out their email address. Maybe they want to call or text, or the other way around. But one of the reasons I'm thinking of rethinking this is because we want to use a system that will send us and the submitter of the survey 123 of the report an auto-generated email. So we've used this before in some of the other reporting tools we have, like for Kogon Grass. And I'm thinking it may be important to make email address a required field on there. That way that we can be sure that they're getting an auto-generated email. One of the important things about the automated emails that we found and that we are interested in having in this spotted lanternfly reporting tool is that if we ended up getting a large number of reports, let's say if spotted lanternfly does end up in South Carolina and it becomes, or when it ends up in South Carolina and it becomes a big deal and a lot more of the public are knowing about it and reporting it, then we don't want to have to or want to feel obligated to follow up with every report and make a call or send an email to each person who sent us a report. And one of the things about the auto-generated email is we could draft that auto-generated email to mention that we'll only be following up with them if and when it's deemed necessary. So in essence, the automated email could be really helpful of kind of responding to the public, keeping a good face for Clemson and not avoiding us leaving people hanging with their reports, but also not wasting a lot of time when there are reports that either are in areas where we already know we had it, or in areas or people reporting things that aren't spotted lanternfly. So the automated emails is important, and that's one of the reasons that I'm thinking of changing up maybe the way that we collect their contact information. Another feature of Esri Survey 123 that is not really set up on this section, that's one of those improvements that I would like to make in the future is, you can select, like, for example, if I selected call, I could set this up to where it generated a new question. So if you select call, it could pop up a new question for the phone number, and we could have a specific format for the way we want a phone number, same for email and that kind of thing. So I may be working on that but right now they can choose one or all of these, and then we ask for folks to enter their preferred contact information in this final box. One more lesson learned and one more thing that I think I would change about our Survey 123 is in this final box, I like to have a notes or extra information box. And we've noticed in the very limited use that we've gotten from this reporting tool so far that even down in this box where people are putting their contact information, sometimes they're adding a few notes. about, the situation in which they found or think they may have found spotted lanternfly. Maybe they say, I've got a specimen for you if you want to come get it, or other little notes. So I think it should have a note section at the end where we solicit just a little bit more information that can help us sort through these kind of reports that we're getting, or that we will probably be getting in the future. I guess I'm going to pause right here for just a second and glance at the Q&A, just wondering if there's, maybe give you all the opportunity, if anybody has a question or suggestion while we're looking at our Survey 123 form that y'all would like to deliver to us. I'm looking at the Q&A. Let's see.
Yeah, Matt, there were a couple questions that came in that you ended up answering, but there's the one up there at the top about auto-generated emails through Survey 123. Are you creating? I'm not sure what the is that like your message has been received. You will receive a response shortly.
Sure. Well, and I'll go into that a little bit, and there may be people on this in this summit that can help us with that. A lot of what I'm presenting is our plans for South Carolina. So we haven't really been, being that we don't have any infestations, we haven't been inundated with a lot of reports yet. And it hasn't really necessitated us getting on the ball and creating all the things that we would like to. But with auto-generated emails, what we've done with some of our other Survey 123s is I've used a third-party software company that creates a webhook that will take your Survey 123 submission and then create an email that sends an email out to the person who submitted it, and it also sends one to our invasives email inbox, and we can choose what text to put in each of those emails. I'm looking into not using that same software that I've used. I'm looking into trying to use like a Microsoft Power Automate. I know creates similar kind of webhooks. I'm just not tech savvy enough to have worked it out quite yet. And we've got other folks at Clemson that are, much better at that kind of thing, that are going to cooperate with me and hopefully get that in place. I see somebody says started out using phone calls and emails for reporting, but web is better. Yeah, I agree. I'm hoping that we're going to get ahead of it a little bit here, and then when we are inundated with reports, we have an easy way to filter through them rather than answering tons of phone calls. And is reporting anonymous, or do you need an email to complete? I believe right now we allow people to submit without an email. And that's one of the things that I was kind of thinking about is maybe just making that mandatory, not mandatory necessarily, but you can set up the Survey 123 that will make certain fields that won't submit unless you enter something in those fields. I kind of hate to do that because I don't want people who don't have an email or are afraid of getting spammed or that kind of thing to not report, but it may be one of those things that's just worth it. And I see somebody say Power Automate is very easy. That's good. Hopefully I'll get that figured out. So with that, I'm going to go back to my my slide here.
Matt, it's Dana. I'm sorry, I can't type a question in, but I do have a question about the photo mechanism that you have. Does it capture a GPS point?
It likely
when
does.
A photo is taken.
I'm not sure about where to find that in the metadata and that kind of thing, but if a report is submitted, it's going to obviously give you the location that you chose. But I could see where a photo might be important too, because if somebody just didn't do that right or didn't use their GPS for that, it could be nice to see where the photo was taken. And I'm guessing that is somewhere in the metadata, but I've never looked for it.
Yeah, it is kind of important. We learned early on, people would come into Pennsylvania and take pictures, and then they'd go home to like Delaware or New Jersey before they had it, and they would say, "Hey, look at this pretty bug I found," and everybody would freak out. So I just don't want you to, where Facebook Facebook, if they post it when they get home, you know, you don't want to be sitting there and suddenly Charleston is showing up hot. So it is kind of important that you be able to identify where those pictures are taken. It will save you some heartburn and
Sure.
heart attacks.
Matt, I also comment, there was something that came in from Kyle in California about people using email accounts or PCs at like public locations, libraries and things like that. So something else to keep in mind as far as that location data from where it's submitted.
Sure. Yeah, I guess the hope is that folks will, if they're not using a mobile device and using GPS, the hope is that they would zoom in on that map and try to pinpoint as best they could where their report insect was from. Well, with another minute or two that I have left, I was just going to mention some of the things we use the public reports for. This survey 123 that's set up right now, we've only gotten about a dozen reports, so we don't have much experience with this with spotted lanternfly. And but when we do get more reports, the plan is to build a dashboard, and we do have experience using dashboards with some of our other surveys, like our CAPS and Plant Protection Act detection surveys that we do. So we could set up a dashboard that could be used by our inspectors and other folks around the state. We could have indicators or parts of the map to be different for to indicate which reports came from where, and help our staff, you know, kind of divide the amount of reports that they need to follow up on. That's something that I envision that we haven't, you know, really messed with yet. And then to just say what we're doing right now or what we've done thus far is with the limited reports that we have gotten, the vast majority of them, I want to say out of the dozen, probably 2 were obviously not spotted lanternfly because they'd included photos and it was something else. But probably 10 of them, probably the rest of them were just unverifiable. Folks that would submit a report, if you would call them and follow up with them, they'd say, I'm sure I found a spotted lanternfly, but I didn't take a picture of it. I don't have a specimen for it, but I can tell you exactly where it is, and that kind of thing. So with that kind of information, we found the best thing we can do is just keep up with it and use that information or use those locations to target our survey efforts. Because if it's possible that the report was accurate, it's just unverifiable. You know, maybe we show up and we don't see any host species, but there are locations that we can keep in mind as we continue to monitor the state and to do detection surveys and possibly trapping in the future, that kind of thing. So that's pretty much where we are with South Carolina and our reporting tool. I appreciate the time in the summit.
Thanks, Matt. Just for a quick clarification, Kyle did make a comment about the it was his comment about the public computer was more in relation to the email address concern. So just
Okay.
wanted to make a note of that. And then there was another question that came in through the Q&A. Are you able to enlarge the photos in survey 123 on your phone? So I guess that may be something about, you know, adjusting the size or the ability to kind of clear up your photographs when you submit them. Do you know anything about that?
You know, I don't. I would have to try it on a mobile device and play with it a little bit. I know once we get the photos, you know, we can do, depending on how good they are when they come to you, when we get them on our end, we often try to expand them and look closer. But that would be a good thing to look into is whether folks could adjust that before they submit it.
Well, I don't see anything else, Matt, so I think you're good. Appreciate it. You're going to stick around if anything else comes up through this session?
Sure.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right, so moving on. I am going to be presenting next, and I don't have any slides. I can't activate my camera either, so I will just talk here. But I'm going to go over Illinois' kind of perspective and how we've been preparing for spotted lanternfly arrival. I'm going to kind of take it in a three-pronged approach. But coming off of Matt's presentation, it kind of jogged my memory that setting up some kind of reporting tool is going to be critical. We've done something, nothing as elaborate as that. Basically, some dedicated or a dedicated email address that we have that goes through U of I. So we do have multiple eyes that or multiple addresses that actually receive those notifications. So you know, if somebody's out on vacation or just happens to miss it, we do have the ability to kind of cross-check those. But kind of what I was looking at was basically a readiness plan, a response plan, I should say. So we do have an early detection and rapid response plan that we drafted and built out back in 2018, and it's something that we revisit and update every few years as necessary, as things change. We're up for another revision this year, and it's one of those things that kind of seems like we're going to have to put it into effect any moment. But you know, if anybody's interested in this, I can put my email if you don't have it already. I can forward you or share what we have here in Illinois, so you don't have to start anew, so to speak. But really, we're looking at things like, of course, the background. We looked at Illinois specific pathways, so I think that's going to be a common theme that comes up is where to be looking. You know, in general, nationally and specifically within your state, based on your transportation corridors and industries. You know, of course, you want to review the resources that are at risk. We took a close look at that in Illinois, and you know, as the research develops and you know, studies are done, which everybody's appreciative of, you know, that may be changing and relatively dynamic. So there may be things that are not necessarily looked at very closely now because there hasn't been the opportunity, but your state may potentially be at risk, or your industries may potentially be at risk based on what you have and that quote unquote unknown. Of course, the scope and the purpose of why we're doing this, readiness in general. I think this is a key. I mean, readiness kind of is what it all revolves around, and I'll get into that in a little more detail. But when we're talking about readiness, you know, it's identifying the who's, the what's, the when's, and the where's, and the why's, and who's going to respond, how they're going to do it, what your authorities are, staffing, and things along those lines. So all that stuff to keep in mind as far as what you're going to do when it finally does show up, and giving you that opportunity to respond relatively quickly, and knowing what that response is going to look like. You know, moving beyond that initial detection, whenever that may happen or how it may happen. Obviously, there's going to be some time related with identifying a new infestation in a new state. But then you have further detection efforts, delimiting, things along those lines to try and figure out, is this relatively small? Is it large scale? How long has it been here? And you're going to dictate your response based on that, as well as your plans. Your identification protocols and procedures, as far as collecting samples, sending them in, and getting that official identification, especially as a new record in the state. And then what your response is going to be. You know, are you going to have a full-on, you know, control and management effort? Is it going to be more of a regulatory approach? Thinking about those kinds of issues and how you're going to structure your response and your activities thereafter. So, you know, looking at kind of shifting gears a little bit and looking at it from more of a focused perspective on the readiness side of like education and outreach. We've done a lot of work here engaging the public and citizen scientists, so to speak. And Tricia Bethke at the Morton Arboretum presented here last year. And she's been the champion of that as our forest pest outreach coordinator here in Illinois. And just going through some of the numbers that she's provided me, you know, the outreach and the number of people that have been touched or informed about this over the years is quite remarkable. And I think that goes to show that, you know, us as government officials or state or federal folks, whoever that may be, our numbers are relatively small. But when you start to get that exponential growth of people talking to people, that's where you're going to really get the biggest bang for your buck on the eyes and ears out there looking for for this pest, if you haven't found it yet. So starting off in 2015 is kind of when we springboarded this. And since then, the number of trainings we've had every year has been anywhere between 25 all the way up to about 80, 85. The number of people trained obviously started off relatively small, couple hundred, and then as we've built the project and people have gained interest in it, we've gotten up to 2,000, 3,000, 6,000 in 1 year. Number of outreach events have been anywhere between 50, anywhere from 10 up to 174 actually. So those numbers are obviously a little weird because of COVID. So we had a lot of activity in the outreach events prior to COVID. Then once that hit, they dropped dramatically, as have the number of attendees for the most part. But those numbers seem to be ticking up. So, but through those efforts, all of those trained volunteers and staff have added over 2,000 positive Tree of Heaven records through EDSMAPS and iNaturalist over 8 years. We knew going into this that we had a pretty heavy infestation of Tree of Heaven, especially in our urban areas. But we're in an unfortunate situation where we have verified records of Tree of Heaven in all 102 of our counties. So that's something that knowing that we probably have to keep a little broader focus or broader eyesight on where it could potentially establish. Whereas if it's in your state or Tree of Heaven is in your state in localized areas, then we can make that kind of correlation that's probably where your efforts are going to lie or your infestations are going to be. Again, the records kind of fluctuated. They built up through COVID and then kind of dwindled afterwards. But we have 607 Tree of Heaven records in 39 counties that are being monitored, which is cool. And then we've completed 607 pilot spotted lanternfly forms through EDSMAP Pro as well. So Tricia has been working with the University of Georgia to help develop that quite a bit. So I commend her and the Morton Arboretum for championing this. Moving into the focus for 2023, we want to increase Tree of Heaven and spotted lanternfly monitoring programs. So now that we've identified where Tree of Heaven is, we want to keep an eye on those to kind of hedge our bets. Synchronous training programs and in-person trainings, of course. Those trainings are the way that we kind of continue to get that word out and keep it out. One of the challenges that we saw with emerald ash borer, even so, now to date, is that we have counties that haven't been confirmed positive. So people look back and they think, well, that was something from 10 years ago. Do we need to worry about it? And so trying to keep this insect at the forefront of people's awareness is critical moving forward, especially if you want them to be looking for it and be engaged. Increase outreach to high risk pathways. Of course, that's always going to be something that needs to be done, whether it's transportation, airports, air travel, things along those lines. Fortunately, or I guess unfortunately, and this may be a good segue into what California is going to cover next, but we didn't have a lot of engagement from some of our key partners, I would say, early on here in Illinois. We don't have a huge wine industry, grape industry, and so we didn't get much early interest from them. Fortunately, that has recently changed, like as of this week. So we're going to be continuing to work with them as well as some of the specialty crop associations here in Illinois to get them aware. Illinois is the leader in pumpkins and horseradish, and so things like that I think are the ones that we need to keep an eye on, especially here, to kind of get an idea or assess what the potential impacts could be. We hear grapes, we hear stone fruits and things like that, but there's probably those specialty crops that may be relatively specific to your individual state that there just isn't much resolution or information on yet. So, regarding, excuse me one second. Going back to kind of the readiness plan, again, identifying who those key partners are. I mentioned that the education and outreach work with Tricia and the Morton Arboretum has been huge. But this is by far the largest list of cooperators and stakeholders that I've ever developed with something like this. I mean, with emerald ash borer, it was quite a bit smaller than what we're looking at here, but You know, of course, you have departments of agriculture, both state and federal, vintners and grape growers, green industry associations, forestry development council, Illinois Natural History Survey. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And you know, kind of tongue in cheek, the more that we talk about this pest, and the more conversations you have, the more you realize that there's more and more folks that need to be involved. And that's probably the key, is to not pigeonhole yourself, not think that you have everything done at any given moment, because there's probably always more that can be done, more folks that can be talked to, more folks that can be engaged and brought into the conversation, whether it is from a early detection, rapid response perspective, or just a general knowledge and understanding. You know, like Matt mentioned earlier, the reporting side of it is key, and this has come up recently as well, is that if you don't have a mechanism to report and respond, particularly early on when most of those reports are going to be negative, you're going to lose the trust and your ability to have folks continue to do that. So you have to have some kind of mechanism in place to say, we got your report, we appreciate your report, we're going to look into it, and let them know that it's not falling on deaf ears. So that's something really important to consider moving forward, is those reporting mechanisms and how you handle those, because the public engagement is going to be that important. So I know I went through pretty quickly. I don't have a whole lot more that I can cover. I saw a lot of questions coming through the Q&A. Did we put in place movement restrictions on specific commodities or any transportation to reduce SLF introduction? Sven, no, we have not put in an external quarantine or anything. There is a model quarantine. I know there were a handful of folks that are actually on this call that were on that group along with me. It was through the National Plant Board. So there is the ability to get kind of a template that we put together to draft up or put in your own external quarantine to try and reduce the introduction of SLF into your state, but we did not do that specifically, no. And yeah, 102 counties here in Illinois. So Tricia, maybe did you answer that actually? Yep, it has been mapped. So yeah, we started off with some raw data that I think was basically just being tracked through for different purposes. It might have been through our forestry invasive species folks that were tracking other invasive plants and things like that, and they just had that as a record. So it was nice that we were able to start off with that. But even so, I mean, that was probably well over 50% lit up as far as confirmed counties with tree of heaven. Even prior to when we started this, we knew about spotted lanternfly and its affinity for tree of heaven, and we started to look at this specifically and focus on that connection. Any other questions or comments? I guess if there's one parting thought, you know, I briefly expressed it earlier on with you know, frustrations early with trying to engage some key partners, and you know, I guess again my point to that was that you know, you can't give up. You know, there may be that moment where a switch is flipped or a light comes on, or maybe the right person talked to the right person and just happened to get that person engaged. So I'm really happy that we have, even though it happened earlier this week, that we made those connections and got those people interested. You know, that's critical moving forward, because you want those folks that are going to be impacted by this helping you make your determinations and decisions and approach how to best address this, because you know, they're the ones that understand what it's going to mean to them, and we're here to help them. So making decisions for somebody else like that's always challenging. So to get their input is critical as far as doing what's best for everybody moving forward. So with that, one more came in. Aren't they worried about trade with other states? Matt, can you be more specific? I think Yeah, I mean, just to kind of expand on that a little bit, you know, trade is one of the big drivers on with this insect, and those external quarantines and regulations that states are putting in to try and keep it out. So there are mechanisms in place. Someone actually asked earlier if Chicago was infested, and I think there was a map that came up that showed something on Chicago as far as having a detection, and that was a regulatory detection. So we've had interceptions come through of dead insects on nursery stock and things like that. And that material was transported under a compliance agreement. So that material was treated. So it was a perfect example of how the system is, it works the way it was supposed to work. Those, I think, additionally were probably related to air traffic, cargo and things like that. So we don't have any confirmations here in Illinois, but with regards to the external quarantine, you know, we're always worried about it coming here, but the problem with this bug is you've probably seen and will see is that it can move on so many different methodologies or conveyances that it's really tough. So it was just a decision that we decided here in Illinois not to do, but you know, once it is found here, we'll have to look at internal quarantines and interior quarantines and things like that. I wonder if similar organizations are in the infested state can reach out to their counterparts and non-infested. Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I mean, I think once people start talking and realizing it, you know, there's some groups that are very vocal and powerful, and others, you know, Illinois here, we have a burgeoning grape industry and wine industry. So, you know, maybe there's just not that much awareness or concern about it at this point, and that may be our fault for not conveying it or messaging it strong enough. But I do think that these organizations may be chapters of national organizations, so there should be some larger scale conversations going on. To what extent is the transportation of woodlog products a source of SLF introduction? That's probably something that I would need some help on answering. You know, we looked at it as a forestry pest, and we always talk about these things, you know, laying eggs on trees and other surfaces. So, I mean, I think wood and log and firewood is a concern to keep in mind moving forward. But you know, what I would go out on a limb, and yep, Christmas trees as well. I would go out on a limb and say that it's a component. It's just another thing that needs to be kept in mind. But we are seeing it move on some I would consider more challenging conveyances to keep an eye on and monitor. And are you inspecting areas where new construction is happening? I believe that is the way how it came to my county. We are not, but that's a good point. You know, some of the information we saw earlier on was you know, a connection to rusted metal and equipment. And obviously we talk about trucks and trains and things like that. So, you know, not only is it going to be plant material and organic stuff like that, but also metal and inanimate objects for the most part. Yeah, which again kind of leads to the greater challenge of this. Couple more coming in through the chat, I see.
Scott, this is Dana.
Yeah.
So just going back to the wood products, we do know of a couple of instances where some old dead egg masses were there or on wood packing materials. So yes, it is a method, but again, raising awareness with our industries, that's why the outreach is so important. So you get people looking and knowing what to do when they find something to try and prevent it from moving. Sometimes that can be through quarantine, sometimes through permits, but the overall takeaway everybody needs to have is raising everyone's awareness.
Agreed, Dana. And yep, there was a comment in the chat about Christmas trees. That was how one of our regulatory incidents this year was regarding Christmas trees. And that was the one I was talking about as far as being shipped under compliance and that was nursery stock. But yeah, Christmas trees is something that would be of concern. And then Angie mentioned that, yeah, very similar in movement and concern to spongy moth. I think a lot of the parallels were made earlier on.
Yes,
Until we started to realize that may not have the close affinity to wood products or organic, I should say, plant material as spongy moth does. But that's a good point.
right. And that is what a lot of the beginning items were modeled after for spotted lanternfly.
Yep.
We did use spongy moth, but also with the wood products, we don't know of huge infestations happening because of movement on wood products. So
Thanks, Dana, and thanks, Alex. I appreciate the the compliment from Southwest Michigan. Thank you. Yeah, we do have a lot of residents and folks moving back and forth between the Chicagoland area and Southwest Michigan, so that's a pathway of concern as well. So I appreciate everybody's questions. I'll be around obviously the rest of the day. Feel free to shoot me any questions or concerns in the chat or the QA. But to keep things rolling, I would like to bring on Mark McLaughlin or someone from California. Mark or Jan? Yeah, so next up we have Mark McLaughlin with the California Department of Food and Agriculture, and he's going to discuss specifically preparing stakeholders for spotted lanternfly. So we kind of segued into that nicely for you, Mark. Take it away.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to participate today and kind of give kind of an overview of what we're doing in the West, if you will, California. And I think, I would say appreciate others. Of course, Dana Rhodes is at the epicenter, has been very helpful for me in engagement. Matt Travis, USDA, and all that, the National Plant Board, the recent NASDA thing, and that there is an engagement for the West and California, if you will, because this map I have used recently this year in describing what the issue is for actually happening back east of the infested states, where California is and where the West is, especially if you take our wine industry, it's about worth $40 billion a year. If you took tourism into light of that, Oregon and Washington's are about $2 billion. Our table grapes alone are $2 billion. So these numbers are substantial and not overbearing to anybody else that are wine producing states, but in addition to other crops, but wine is big. And so what we did is this map of California shows, if you look at California, we have some planning going on. California's infrastructure is on this map at a high level. That includes all of our pathways, if you will, and future pathways. We have existing rail lines within California, mainly north-south. We have our transportation system. We have about 100,000 miles of roads in California. Then we have our ports. Long Beach is the major port in California. Oakland is another one. In addition to that, we have inland water ports, if you will. Stockton, which is just south of here, and Sacramento, where we are, is about 45 minutes from here. West Sacramento, which is just, of course, west from Sacramento, has a smaller port also. So these will be even more important as the future goes ahead. High-speed rail is on this map as other transportation modes. In addition to that, in rail in California, the north-south systems for UP and BNSF are north-south, and those are planned for what they're calling inland ports off of rail lines. So we have all these pathways, we have all of these additional people that are coming here. So we're really looking at the planning of 20 million more people here by 2040. So with all that said, how we're managing our pest prevention system here, we're planning for the future. And if you took SLF, I wanted to get a good picture of rail. North is UP, which comes from the west, and everything starts at Scott's backyard in Chicago. BNSF is mainly to the south. I wanted to start going backwards because that's kind of how we're looking at the issue of the infested states, the rail pathways. Each state on this map has a rail yard, and which is kind of demarcated. It's hard to see in a little X. So there's a very important focus, as Scott was talking about, rail and its pathway, the rusted metal, the cars, and all the different containers that are shipped, especially from Long Beach, goes to a truck, goes to a train, train to a truck to a ship. So that cycle is continuous, and working with railroads is very difficult. And we're trying to get onto our local rail yard here in Roseville. As I like to say, it's the largest rail yard west of the Mississippi, just probably 20 minutes north of Sacramento, about an hour away from Napa, which in Sonoma, and probably about 45 minutes away from Lodi, area south of us, which is another grape area. So at CDFA, planning has been going on for about 4 years or so. We have an exterior quarantine. And when we talk about stakeholders, we have industry, we have county ag commissioners here. We have about 52 counties with each one has an ag commissioner that we work closely with. And then we have industry, and then stakeholders include other states. So we have a strong platform with Western Plant Board, National Plant Board, and especially recently with National Plant Board, APHIS and NASDA on this topic of strategic plan. So we have an exterior quarantine that's been set up. We have a strategic operations plan that we would deploy in case it gets here. We have a science advisory panel that we put together almost a year and a half ago. And then we've had outreach collectively with APHIS the last 2 years with, we'll call it the grape industry, which include raisins, table grapes, and wine grapes. And we have about 4 major wine grape associations here. And we did joint briefings with them, with industry and USDA. So we're happy with that. And I recently in January, I went to Lodi Grape Day. That appellation is just south of here, and it's the largest producer of wine grapes for blending for the state. So a lot of major wineries purchase from that region in addition to producing their own. And then I made a presentation with this same map to about 250 growers in that area. And so they were very appreciative of the information. And we're getting to a place about what industry can help us with. We also had provided some research to UC Davis, some research funding that created a Master Gardener application for, we have about 4,000 Master Gardeners in California on spotted lanternfly. Our secretary was involved in that. So the stakeholders could be everybody, and then we respond to many reports, if you will. iNaturalists are just citizens of seeking and spotting and thinking that they found spotted lanternfly. And so we research those also. So yeah, it's kind of a day-to-day thing as we roll it out. We have momentum, I think, with the latest strategic plan, and we support many efforts on funding for the states and prevention instead of trying to fight it when we get here. We do have plans for preparation of when it will get here, how we will do that with our counties and with industry. And we're trying to set aside funds to do just that. So at a high level, that's kind of the stakeholder. And I appreciate the other states that we've talked with along the way. Scott, of course, has been very helpful and say, what can we do? Dana is an unlimited resource, just like University of Pennsylvania, Julie Urban, and trying to solve this issue. So I would like to continue. This is how we look at the stakeholder outreach as a nationwide topic. It's not just California or Western centric. And I think there's a lot of momentum that's up for other states to help facilitate the states that have infestations now. We've had bumps in the road recently. I would say in the last 3 or 4 months with other states shipping to us and our exterior quarantine. We worked some things out with Dana in Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and other states have come forward to try and to ensure that they can comply with our quarantine, so that we can set in place master permits for that to facilitate. We are fortunate to have, we have 16 border stations in California at all major roadways coming in. I-80, of course, is a major one, where we stop vehicles and check them. Trucks, mainly a lot of trucks. Truckee Station, which is up by Lake Tahoe, is where we found most of our SLF finds. We found most recently live viable egg masses on steel plates from New Jersey. Pods are another concern. So we have found a lot of SLF dead. We've also found them in air cargo, along with Japanese beetle inspections. So I think that the coordination at a nationwide has happened. And I think the conversation is good with other states. And as we work through things to comply with our quarantine with other states to ensure that commerce can happen, all that good. Education, outreach are important. So I think it's a work in progress. And I'm encouraged, and I hope, I'm optimistic of the latest strategic plan that was put together and presented to NASDA. So respecting time, I wanted to make sure that there was time for questions, or that was a high level overview, I think, or if anybody wanted to ask or add to that. But this is how we're looking at SLF stakeholder coordination as a nationwide conversation. So Plant Board has been very helpful in facilitating that with APHIS. So Farm Bill is another thing that's coming. I think that California, I think we just put in our letter of what we think is important, and hopefully other states can gather around that. So with that, Scott, I know it was a quick overview, but I just want to make sure we stay on schedule here.
No, very good, Mark. And I do appreciate the comment about it being a national effort.
It is.
I think everybody's been very cooperative and understanding and participated. So that's pretty cool. There's a question from Paul in here, which I think we may have a lot of folks that want to answer. But Mark, do you want to handle, or you want to start off with this one as far as deeming that railroads are presented as a significant pathway? You know, if this is the case, is it worse than road transportation, and why? If you have a thought on that, I think then we could open.
I think they're both the same. The railroad, the thing is with railroad, we don't have in California, we don't have a border station for railway. They operate how they operate, when they want, how they want to do it. And I'm optimistic that we can set something up with rail to inspect the yard, at least here or other places, or help facilitate, if you will, like Scott, at your yards, and coordinate with other states. The pods and transportation, I mean, things are getting through, right? They just are. We can't stop everything. But our concern is we've stopped firewood coming from New Jersey. Now, who would bring firewood all the way across the country in a trailer from New Jersey? But that's just what happens, right? So we're finding that I think they're equal. Just to say the answer, the railroad thing is kind of the last frontier, if you will, to get cooperation and inspection. Rusted metal is very favorite, and how we can coordinate with them on a safety program or be part of their safety inspection. That would be the goal. And as far as consumers and people traveling with pods and trailers, and it's just something we're going to have to try to address as best that we can. I think they're equal, if that's
Okay.
Yeah.
Go
Scott,
ahead, Dana.
Yep.
Go ahead, Dana.
Just another point to throw in here.
Mhm.
Wherever you have disturbed areas, so railroads, highways, you have more tree of heaven.
Yep.
So that is one thing to
Mhm.
always keep in consideration as you are looking for this. And Mark, you and I are definitely going to have to talk. There is a difference between Penn State University and
Oh,
Pennsylvania
yeah.
University. We'll
Fair
talk
enough.
about that later.
Yes. Especially in a football, if there's a sports context, right? I want to make sure we get that right. But I think it was fortuitous for me to attend the National Plant Board in Pennsylvania. This past, or in 2022. So I got to see firsthand what's going on there. So.
Mark, I don't know if you have the Q&A up.
Yeah, I'm looking
next
at
one.
it right here.
Okay, yep. The James was saying he doesn't recall seeing much tree of heaven in California as many eastern states. Is it pretty common in California?
Yes, we have a lot of it. And a lot of it is in riparian areas. Riparian areas that we have, of course, our landscapes. We have many geographies and landscapes in California that goes northwest, east, north, south, and east of west, of course. Our geographies are different. Our Central Valley is different. A lot of it is our rail corridors do not look like Pennsylvania or the eastern United States, except for if you climb in elevation to more forested areas or hardwood areas and deciduous areas as you go up in elevation. Most of our rail areas are fairly denuded, if you will, and the rail likes that. But in and around, right on the perimeter of those areas are disturbed areas right at the fence line or property line. And then riparian areas, we have major invasives, including arundo and tree of heaven together. So we do have quite a bit of it here. Okay, where are we at here? Life
I
stages.
think Cindy, yep. Can you
Yeah.
repeat the cases of life stages
Sure.
intercepted? Yep.
We have mainly dead adults. The egg mass that we did find in New Jersey was those were viable this time. We have not seen that before. We found dead egg masses, if you will, but this last one was viable. So that's mainly what we found. The other life stages I'm unclear about, except for the adult stages. I don't think we found anything in between, not that I'm aware. Let's see,
Then
where are we at here?
the next one, any plans and measures California has put in place to be prepared for SLF? Any readiness or, I mean, aside from your external quarantine and things like that, anything?
We have our operations plan. We also are cognizant of, I want to bring it forth here since it's in the forefront here, is environmental clearance in the same context. We have our CEQA world here, which is our own Environmental Quality Act, and then the NEPA side, which we're very interested in on clearance of that and coordinating with USDA. We have a programmatic environmental impact document here for CEQA that we're preparing right now to try to be inclusive of those treatments for clearance, so that we'd be ready for that. We're taking best methods and best practices from back east on our treatment. We've looked at chemicals as far as clearing that. We do have emergency response powers and methods, if you will. We have major landowners on the federal side here, which is another reason the NEPA thing is important. We have Bureau of Land Management, Bureau of Reclamation, Forest Service, U.S. Forest Service, which is a major landowner here. We have major national parks, and you name it, U.S. Fish and Wildlife has major refuges here. So we have a lot of federal partners, if you will, in land and access that we'd want to make sure we had coordination. So those are important in being prepared for us to facilitate in California. Our regulatory environment is probably unlike any others, not only state and federal regulatory environment. So we want to make sure we can navigate so that we can go treat, attack something and eradicate something as soon as possible. So that's kind of where we are on that in the preparation. Let's see. Is this Jules here, Scott? Let's see. Are there any?
Yeah, and I'm not sure if this is, maybe if you want to start, and then if there's anything that any of the other states want to add. I don't know if this is specific to your perspective or what other states are doing, but if you want to take that to kick it off, yeah.
Yeah, so we're trying to develop, and I think we're stubbing our toes a bit, and I'll just be honest about that, with making sure that we're communicating and providing other states our let's see, exceptions. I wouldn't say exemptions, but how we would do a master permit with other states to ship here to make sure that we're all on the same page. We just experienced that, of course, with Dana's group, North Carolina. There's another one, Ohio recently, and I think we've worked that out to date. And if not, I would like to know about that. And then the goal is to send our master permit or put it out there for everybody to take a look at of the states that are infested, or also to be proactive if we wanted to set that in place with other states that aren't infested too, so that we can make sure that all happens ahead of time. I'm fine with doing proactive planning in that regard. Let's see.
Well, Mark, I want to keep things going too, but I think there were a couple comments about Tree of Heaven. And then maybe if I think this is a follow-up from Cindy about those egg masses and what they were on. So if you can maybe just answer that one.
The egg masses were on steel plates.
Okay.
Like probably for construction uses, the steel plates that you use for construction.
Perfect.
In streets. And then anything else? I think I touched on the.
No, I think that that gets
shipments.
us up to speed. So, yep.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Mark. We appreciate it. And are you going to be able to stick around to answer any additional questions that may pop up?
Yeah, a little bit. I do
Great.
have other meetings coming there.
Okay,
Yeah.
no problem. We appreciate it. Thanks.
So thank you very much.
Thanks, Mark.
Mhm.
Okay, so next we have Pierre Siegert from the New Hampshire Department of Agriculture, Markets and Food, and she's going to discuss how to manage a regulatory incident. So we've talked about this kind of separate from infestations. And then additionally, how to prepare, how they've been preparing for spotted lanternflies. So Pierre, you're loaded and ready to go. Take it away.
I'm ready. Thanks, Scott. And so we're at the opposite end of the country from California now, although I did hear we have a similar concern. And Mark, I wanted to tell you that we have intercepted more than once firewood being brought all the way from California to New Hampshire. People love to move their firewood.
I know, right? What's
But
up with that?
It's a whole different webinar that we could do on that.
That's
So
true.
So thanks for inviting me today. I've been asked to discuss New Hampshire's response to regulatory incidents in nurseries and how we've been preparing for spotted lanternfly. So the guiding principle that we've been kind of using as we think about spotted lanternfly in New Hampshire is that it requires a pragmatic approach, incorporating the risk of introduction, the risk of establishment, and deployment of any available resources. And the three themes that are going to show up throughout my presentation are that we're going to be coordinating with partner agencies in order to increase our manpower, cooperating with industry and setting clear expectations and best known information about risks, and communicating between sending and receiving states. For our first real spotted lanternfly regulatory incident, and by real, I mean of actual live life stages and not dead insects, I knew I was going to set a precedent for all of our future responses. And I wanted to make sure that we had a thorough response, utilized our resources, and still maintained positive relationships with the impacted industry and our state and federal partners. So what I'm going to do for the rest of this presentation is I'm really going to set the stage with our first regulatory incident and then describe how that one kind of provided our framework for all of the other regulatory incidents we've had since then. And then I'm going to talk about some of our preparatory activities that we've been doing in New Hampshire. And we've been preparing for spotted lanternfly, much as Scott said, since 2015 with a variety of our activities. So our largest and first regulatory incident occurred at a large wholesale nursery in 2020 in New Hampshire. It was September 3rd, which is the Thursday before Labor Day weekend. So I tend to think of Labor Day weekend now as the big weekend where if something's going to happen, that's the weekend it's going to happen on. The response went really well, primarily because of the cooperation of the nursery and communication with the sending state, as well as with PPQ advisors as well. We've used this response as a template for additional responses. And all of our regulatory incidents involving live spotted lanternfly adults or egg masses have actually been at nurseries, or in one case at the property next door to a nursery. This may be because we have established relationships with the nursery industry and they know who to call when they find spotted lanternfly. And so we were first notified by nursery personnel on September 3rd via email to all of my 4 division of plant industry staff, and I had staff that responded probably within the hour to that nursery to look for spotted lanternfly on their property. They had identified 2 adults. Overall, the response included staff from my office, staff and support from PPQ, and a lot of nursery staff and resources went into this response. They're a nursery that's very proud of their reputation, and they wanted to make sure that they maintained that reputation for delivering high quality nursery stock and caring about their plants and caring about their customers. Overall, the response included stop sales, inspections and surveys, treatment requirements, trainings and a compliance agreement, and trace activities. So for stop sales, written stop sale on all nursery stock in the blocks identified as receiving egg masses that had detections of live SLF adults was issued on September 4th. So the day following the initial detection, they had finished shipping plants already by the time that we had gone out there that day. So the stop sale was pretty much immediate. The stop sale would be released following treatment and follow-up inspections with no new live spotted lanternfly found. Any new find of live spotted lanternfly would establish a new stop sale. So it's a 100-acre nursery. All the blocks of the nursery were inspected, as was the tree line and naturalized areas within the nursery. During our various inspections, we were looking for live adults, we were looking for old egg masses, and we were looking for new egg masses to give us an indication as to whether or not we actually had mating. We conducted actually a total of 11 inspections at the nursery between September 4th and October 27th, 2020. We found during that inspection a total of 13 live SLF. 10 were females. None of them had reached sexual maturity yet. 2 were males. 1, I don't have the sex recorded. All of them were captured. All of them were found either on red maples or willow. There was 1 dead SLF found in a block that was treated with pesticide. And we found 4 old egg masses, 3 on red maples and 1 on black gum. And we found no new egg masses during those surveys. In addition to those surveys, earlier in the fall, we also did an end of season egg mass survey on November 24th. And we incorporate an end of season egg mass survey at any nursery where we've had a regulatory incident. And it's usually right around Thanksgiving. We found no egg masses during that end of season egg mass survey. I should mention, and I'll talk about it a little bit later, that Tree of Heaven is a prohibited invasive plant in New Hampshire, so it's not offered as a plant for sale in any of the nurseries. It also was not found in the vicinity of the nursery. The survey of our tree line and kind of in some naturalized areas within the nursery did include common spotted lanternfly hosts like sumac and wild grape. All of those were found negative for egg masses and for spotted lanternfly adults earlier in the season. We also, at the same time, looked at nearby agricultural sites of interest. There is a very large production greenhouse next door to this nursery that has some outdoor mum fields. We've seen dead spotted lanternfly in mums before. And so we looked at those fields. We found no spotted lanternfly there. There's an apple orchard not too far down the road. We found no spotted lanternfly there. The nearest vineyard is about 5 miles away as the crow flies. Nothing there. We also looked at other vineyards in the state at that time and saw no spotted lanternfly evidence at any of those. Treatment. Treatments were conducted by the nursery. They were ordered by us in order to release stop sales. The nursery has certified pesticide applicators on staff. We could use our usual nursery stock authorities to require treatments. So the nursery paid for the chemical, the equipment, the labor as part of the conditions for release of stop sales. The first treatment was on September 5th, which was the Saturday of Labor Day weekend. Their pesticide applicator canceled his plans in order to do the treatment. And follow-up inspections were identified that treatments were also required then on September 13th and September 15th. What was ordered for treatment was any block where a tree that had an egg mass identified in it was treated, all of the plants within that block, as well as any block where adults were found was treated. And then all of the naturalized willow on the property were also included in the treatment requirements, because at that time, we were really seeing the spotted lanternfly feeding most heavily on willow. And so we wanted to make sure we hit those as well. We did not find any spotted lanternfly in an inspection or survey after September 15th. That was the final day of treatment, and it should also be noticed that there was a hard freeze shortly after that date. Training and compliance agreements. On September 16th, we did 2 different trainings for the entirety of the staff at the nursery. That included the office staff, the field staff, growers, loaders, the president of the company. Everyone throughout the entire organization attended a training about spotted lanternfly. They had 2 different sessions so that they could continue doing some work. During the training, we provided examples of various life stages of spotted lanternfly. We provided some handouts. We had some really good discussions. They asked some great questions. We discussed life cycle and identifying critical control points at which spotted lanternfly could be identified and removed from the nursery stock prior to it leaving the property. We discussed the impacts of spotted lanternfly establishment in New Hampshire, the threat to grapes, the increased costs for industry, including theirs, and that it's a nuisance for the public and for their customers. We also signed a compliance agreement with the nursery management that day. We had agreed to and reviewed the terms with management prior to the training and the signing the agreement. We had points of discussion where there were things that we could be flexible on to help it work better for their system. And we'd already made those changes. Putting the nursery under compliance agreement put an awful lot of additional work for documentation and inspection requirements on the nursery and on their staff. They have since indicated that they are willing to do whatever they need to do in order to reduce the likelihood of them ever having to go under compliance agreement with us again for spotted lanternfly, because it was a lot of additional work for them to move plants off of the property. We released the compliance agreement at the end of October, as there had been several hard freezes by then, and there was no more evidence of the presence of spotted lanternfly. And we've always communicated with them that if the conditions are right in terms of indicating that another compliance agreement would be needed, then we would put them under compliance agreement again. The compliance agreement included record keeping, documented inspections by trained nursery staff, inspections, follow-up inspections by my staff, and notification to receiving nurseries that they had done these inspections before the material was shipped out. We also worked with them over the next season to develop some best management practices for reducing the likelihood of establishment of spotted lanternfly at nurseries. Key staff at the nursery worked with us to develop those industry appropriate BMPs. The goal by the nursery was to give them something that they could implement the following spring in order to minimize the likelihood of their needing to go under compliance agreement again. They implemented the BMPs in 2021 and 2022, and through this effort identified sending nurseries in spotted lanternfly infested state that needed additional support in their response to spotted lanternfly to make sure that they weren't sending nursery stock with egg masses. And the focus of the best management practices was on prevention, scouting, reporting, and response, with a big emphasis on prevention. I will say that the nursery, it takes a lot of time of their staff in the spring to do the inspections that they do as part of the best management practices. We also did some traces with our regulatory event. First, all trees identified with old egg masses came from a single shipping nursery in a single state. And I would say that we communicated with the sending state, and it was super helpful. I'm really glad that we had a good communication relationship with that state. The nursery that had shipped the trees was under compliance agreement. And then the shipping state provided trace information to other receiving states. They conducted a retraining at the nursery and updated their compliance agreement for looking for areas where they needed to have some improvement. And in fact, with that nursery stock from that nursery, we saw an improvement the following year because of those changes that were made. We also did a trace forward immediately from the New Hampshire nursery. Some of the trees from the infested shipment were sent directly to Maine and Massachusetts and were never unloaded in New Hampshire. And so information about those shipments were sent to both of those states as soon as we had the information. And then some of the, that nursery is a major supplier of nursery stock in the New England states. And so once they receive once they take ownership of the trees, they kind of lose the discrimination as to where the sending nursery was, the origin nursery, and where the tree eventually is ending up to be sold. And so it was a little bit challenging to provide specific information about a red maple from one source when they are getting red maples from 20 different sending nurseries. And so receiving states that wanted to know the information did receive trace information about every plant sold from that nursery in the 2020 season. That took significant effort on the part of the office staff. So this graph here I quite like because it is shows the success of the inspection program in New Hampshire, actually. And so what we're looking at here is had 3 years of regulatory incidents where we have found egg masses on nursery stock in New Hampshire in 2020, 2021, and 2022. That's on your x-axis. On your primary y-axis, we have the number of nurseries that have been impacted and the number of adults found. And so the orange bars are the number of adults found, and the gray bars are the number of nurseries that have had interceptions or regulatory incidents. The blue line actually is the number of egg masses that have been found. So the first thing that should jump out to you is that we have seen a big increase in the number of intercepted egg masses between those 3 years. We had 4 that we found in 2020, we had 60 that were found in 2021, and we had over 300 that were found in 2022. And so we also had 1 nursery in 2020 impacted, 2 in 2021, and 4 in 2022. But the thing that's really interesting here is that the number of adults has gone down pretty dramatically. And so even though the egg masses have gone up, those have been identified and removed prior to hatch. We have had circle traps and limb traps that we deployed at those nurseries that were affected. And then we have very low detection of adults after we've had all of those egg masses that have come in, which shows that having a program in place where you're identifying and removing egg masses early in the season is really going to have a positive impact on you later in the season with having fewer adults. Where we do see adults that we have found in those couple of years, they've actually all been found in loading areas and on roads. And so it's a little bit difficult to discriminate as to whether or not those are separate introductions into these busy nurseries, or if they are, from the initial interception. So I feel like the use of BMPs in cooperation with nurseries is critical to this effort. You get a big bang for the effort in terms of reducing the likelihood of spotted lanternfly establishment in New Hampshire by removing these egg masses as they're coming in early in the spring. And good coordination with sending states is critical to this effort. BMPs helped identify nurseries in sending states that needed more support, and later season shipments across the board showed improved compliance compared to earlier season shipments. And so what are our lessons learned? SLF has been and will be intercepted in New Hampshire. We need to utilize our partners. We need to emphasize cooperation with the industry. It's pretty straightforward as to what the risks are and how they can contribute to the risk and assist in response. And we also need to coordinate with sending states. We need to lean into our strengths and authorities. And working with nurseries is a fairly easy lift for us, but we can get a lot of bang for the buck, like I said. And it's really important to send staff to trainings. I see I'm running a little long, so I'm going to just kind of try to blow through the next of these here quickly. So preparing for SLF, we have online tools. We've done some outreach. We've done a lot of work with Tree of Heaven, and I've got some maps I want to show you. I'll talk a little bit about what the status is of SLF regulations in the state, trainings and coordinations, inspections and surveys. So quickly, we have the New Hampshire Department of Ag website. It has an SLF page, and we've got some actually predictive growing degree day maps and tools that are on that website. Those were done in partnership with the U.S. Forest Service and the UNH state climatologist. They're based on 30-year averages of growing degree days, and I have a map for every 50 day growing degree day increment. So if you are expecting different biofixes for different pests, you can actually look at those maps and have an idea of when that normally happens on average in the state. NH Bugs is a wonderful website that was developed for the actually for reporting emerald ash borer. It's a multi-agency website between my office, the Division of Forests and Lands, PPQ, USDA Forest Service, and UNH Cooperative Extension. Cooperative Extension actually runs it, but the content on that website is vetted by all of the agencies, and all of them also drive traffic to that website so that we have a common place for that people can go for information. There's a reporting tool on that website. There's also a social media page, and we've done some social media ad campaigns as well that have gotten a lot of traction. We do outreach to our partner agencies, to legislative committees and advisory boards, to the industry, and to the public. We've done a lot with Tree of Heaven. It's been a prohibited invasive plant since 2004. It means it cannot be sold, bought, propagated, moved, et cetera, within the state. We've had an effort to identify and locate Tree of Heaven on EDMAP since 2015. We've also been working with DOT, municipalities, and others for treatment and removal of Tree of Heaven where we find it. So far, we've removed more than 5,000 in the state. And we are using known locations of Tree of Heaven for monitoring and survey efforts. And I wanted to talk a little bit about development of these risk maps with the U.S. Forest Service. And I would, based on the last couple of talks, I would kind of unveil these slowly, but that's not the way that I set these up. So we don't have a GIS specialist in our department. We're a small department, so we do rely on partnerships with others. And so these maps were developed by Nate Siegert and Tom Luther with the U.S. Forest Service out of the Durham Field Office. And basically what they did, I've got two different maps here. I'm going to talk about the one on the right first. Dana and Scott and others were talking about the relationship between highly disturbed area and Tree of Heaven. And basically the darker maroon you get, you have an increase in road densities as well as an increase in population densities. The lighter gray, that's fewer roads, fewer people. The green dots are where Tree of Heaven is. And so you can see that there is a high correlation there between Tree of Heaven and highly disturbed areas. If you look over to the graph on your right, the lines on that graph are actually the active rail in New Hampshire. There's 385 miles of it. And you can see that there is a very close relationship between Tree of Heaven in the state and where active rail is in the state. And then of course, the purple stars are where we know we have vineyards in the state. And so it helps us identify vineyards that may be particularly at risk because of the presence of rail and Tree of Heaven. Regulating SLF, we do not have an external quarantine. We do not have evidence of any established populations. We've done quite a bit of survey after all of our regulatory incidents. SLF is on the prohibited invasive insect list, which allows us to take action should it be detected. I wanted to emphasize the importance of sending inspectors to trainings because especially when egg masses are at low densities, they can be kind of hard to find. And so I would encourage people to get some of their inspectors some hands-on experience with identifying identifying egg masses under varying densities. We look for spotted lanternfly in nursery inspections following interceptions and reports. We've done orchard surveys, nursery surveys, and participated in the national survey as well. And when we are doing these surveys, we utilize information from EDMAPs to identify Tree of Heaven locations. We look at nearest established populations of spotted lanternfly to the state, and we use our nursery database for information about where our nurseries are receiving nursery stock from. I already talked about our responses to regulatory incidents. And then we've gotten a lot of funding through the Farm Bill. And so if I haven't run out of time completely, I'm happy to answer any questions.
You're good, Pierre. Thank you. There was a question that came in. I think Dana said she wanted to answer it live. So Dana?
So it's Paul's question. Sorry, I was going to type it in, but I'm not used to this. So Paul, egg masses have to kill an egg mass. It has to sustain temperatures like -10, -15 for 30 consecutive days. So the likelihood that you're going to kill an egg mass in our areas, even in New Hampshire, they don't get that cold. So egg mass removal is how you are getting rid of some of these adults and keeping the numbers low.
And the other thing I would say, it wasn't part of your question, Paul, but in every case where we have found egg masses, we have removed them and then we have taken them back to the lab in sealed Petri dishes to make sure they were viable. And in every case, they've been viable.
Well, thank you, Pierre. Thanks for handling that as well. Dana, I don't see any other questions. Oh, there's something that came in. Oh, about development of training materials. Cool, Thomas. Thank you for sharing that. On that note, I did want to share, I did get a message that Dr. Lewis's trap PDF is posted on stopslf.org now. So there were some early conversations or questions about that being available. That is now posted. So.
Hey, Scott, I see a couple of questions in the chat that I thought I would answer. The chemical that was used to treat was bifenthrin. And the eggs masses were actually on the plants. They weren't on the containers. Most of the plants at this wholesale nursery are B&B, and so they were on the trunks of the trees.
Cool. Thanks for addressing those, Pierre. Appreciate it.